Tonight on Reporting Scotland. The political row over Scotland's Chief Constable and his special leave. The Justice Secretary confirms he challenged a decision to allow him to return to work while he was still under investigation. Most people would welcome a reduction in sugar, fat and salt in food to help tackle obesity, says a new report. But is that enough?
It shouldn't all be left to government and so on. It's up to the individual what you put in your mouth and how healthy you want to be.
Also in the programme, a controversial suggestion on what to do with decommissioned oil and gas platforms in the North Sea. Moves to highlight the choking risks of some foods for children following a number of deaths. And the former rugby player diagnosed with MS is now heading for the Winter Olympics. Good evening. The Justice Secretary has insisted he did not exceed his authority when he asked police watchdogs to reconsider their decision to allow Scotland's Chief Constable to return to work while misconduct allegations against him were being investigated. Michael Matheson has been accused of unlawfully blocking the move, but he told MSPs today it was legitimate for him to challenge the decision, which he said had clear deficiencies. Here's our political correspondent, Glenn Campbell.
What Chief Constable Phil Gormley has been hit with since last summer is no laughing matter. A string of gross misconduct allegations which he denies. In fact, Mr Gormley's lawyers describe the complaints as vexatious and opportunistic, and they're accusing the Justice Secretary of blocking the Chief Constable's return to work while the allegations are investigated. According to Mr Gormley's lawyers, on Tuesday the 7th of November, the Scottish Police Authority unanimously agreed the Chief Constable could return to work. The following day, Mr Gormley was informed of this decision in writing. On the Thursday, as he drove back to Scotland, the Scottish Police Authority's former chair, Andrew Flanagan, told him not to return after what they describe as an unlawful intervention by the Justice Secretary. On the Friday, the day Mr Gormley was due back at his desk, it emerged that a fifth misconduct complaint had been made against him. At Holyrood, the Justice Secretary's political opponents accused him of meddling in police business.
The issue here is the Cabinet Secretary's interference, and it is difficult not to suggest hypocrisy. Now it seems the test for whether Michael Matheson gets involved is not whether it is an operational matter, but whether it is in the political interest of Michael Matheson.
Policing in Scotland is in crisis, and the actions of the Cabinet Secretary have turned that crisis into nothing short of a shambles.
But the Minister said he would be rightly criticised if he'd not challenged the Scottish Police Authority's failure to consult on its decision.
Not to consider the implications it has to a live investigation, not to consider the implications it's got for the welfare of staff and officers, and not to even engage with the senior command team within Police Scotland less than 24 hours before they were meant to implement a decision is simply, in my view, unacceptable.
Phil Gormley's request to resume command will be reviewed again towards the end of this month. And by then, 1 in 5 of his days at Police Scotland will have been served on special leave. Glenn Campbell, Reporting Scotland, Holyrood.
Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Riva Alderson joins me. Has the Justice Secretary done enough to silence his critics?
Well, it was certainly a very robust and at times actually heartfelt defence of his position. Mr Matheson outlined the fact that the Scottish Police Authority is at arm's length from government, but he did say that the way that it carried out its functions must maintain the confidence of ministers. And he said quite forcibly that the decision to bring back Mr Gormley wasn't either a robust or a defensible position, and he said it was quite simply unacceptable. So he insists that his discussions with the then chairman of the SPA was purely on the process, on the governance of the authority, and it wasn't on any operational matter, and that would have been out with his legal powers.
So where does this leave Police Scotland and specifically the allegations facing the Chief Constable?
Well, the Chief Constable, of course, as Glenn Campbell mentioned in his report, denies all of the allegations. But the investigations by the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner are continuing. We don't know how long they'll take. Mr Gormley's special leave is due to be reviewed again on Burns Night, January the 25th. And the new chair of the SPA, Susan Deakin, has promised that all decisions taken by the SPA will be open and transparent. But there are calls tonight from some opposition MSPs for a review of the way the SPA operates. Rhoda Grant, the Labour Party MSP, says she has great confidence in Susan Deakin as a politician and a manager, but not as a magician. And she says that the job of running the SPA as it's currently constituted is too great for one person.
Reval, thank you. Doctors say rising pressure on the NHS should not be dismissed as inevitable during the winter. Health boards have been dealing with more falls and flu cases, leading to longer waits in A&E over the festive period. The British Medical Association in Scotland says the situation in the last few weeks has highlighted a lack of funding and a lack of solutions to make the health service sustainable in the long term. The Health Secretary says there are record levels of staffing and investment in the NHS. The UK government has pledged to intensify talks with Scottish ministers to find agreement on key Brexit legislation. The Prime Minister made the pledge after plans to amend the withdrawal bill were controversially dropped. Well, our political correspondent Nick Ardley is in Westminster. Nick, the UK government says it's committed to getting a deal with Scottish ministers, but is that enough?
Well, both governments want a deal eventually, Jackie, to address the concerns that Scottish ministers have. The Scottish Government has said today it may publish its own bill in Holyrood next month, but it doesn't want to reach that stage, and nor do ministers here. So two pledges from the UK Government today. Firstly, that talks with Scotland would be accelerated by the new Cabinet Office Minister David Lidington. Secondly, that whatever's agreed with Holyrood ministers will be reflected in amendments at the House of Lords. That said, there's still a massive row about the fact that scrutiny over those changes will be left to peers rather than MPs. And today the SNP's Westminster leader Ian Blackford argued that wasn't good enough.
The Prime Minister has one last chance. Will she assure the House that these amendments will be tabled ahead of next week, as promised?
The SNP say they want to work with us on the frameworks, on the future frameworks, and we are doing exactly that. They say they want Clause 11 amended, and we are doing exactly that. My right honourable friend is intensifying his discussions with the Scottish Government and indeed with the Executive in Wales as part of this. We will be bringing forward amendments, but the honourable gentleman says that this is a government that never delivers for Scotland. £2 billion extra as a result of the budget, that's delivering for Scotland.
Now, one of the other problems for the SNP is they don't sit in the House of Lords. They oppose it in principle. But I do understand that they're looking for sympathetic peers who can make their case when those amendments are brought forward. Scottish Tory MPs are still frustrated that these amendments aren't happening next week. But I get the impression that they do believe that the changes will eventually come. I fully expect that they will back the government at the next common stage next week, sending it to the Lords. Opposition parties, though, will want concrete action before they believe promises.
Nick, thank you very much. A man who was a resident of Smileham Park Children's Home in Lanark in the 1960s has described it as a concentration camp where the systematic dehumanisation, persecution and torture of children was normal. He said he reported the abuse to police decades ago, but nothing was done. Maura Kinneber reports.
The man who wishes to remain anonymous says he was put into a Catholic care home at the age of 2. He was separated from his siblings and says he and many others were deliberately degraded in a regime of orchestrated persecution and torture. He described Smileham Park in Lanark as a prison, a dungeon, a concentration camp, where children were subjected to systematic violence and emotional abuse. He said there was no privacy, no dignity, no kindness. They weren't treated as human, never mind children. He described beatings, ritual humiliation, being denied basic rights. Giving evidence to the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry before Lady Smith, he said the nuns who ran the home were always severe. It was shattering as a child to endure such cruelty,
and live in such fear.
He told the inquiry he used to harm himself at night because of the terror he suffered and had blocked off some memories in order to survive his ordeal. He said he felt the crimes that took place at Smileham amounted to a holocaust of abuse against thousands of children for decades, adding God did not exist in that place. He said he reported the abuse to the police in the 1990s, but nothing happened. The inquiry continues. Maura Kinneborough reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
A woman has been jailed for 5.5 years for stabbing a woman to death in front of her pregnant daughter. Siobhan Russell killed Mary Lowe in Ballantrae Place in Dundee in September 2016, following a row between the women 2 days earlier. The 31-year-old had been accused of murder but was convicted of the lesser charge of culpable homicide. A court heard a man who claims he was beaten and held by members of a travellers group was instead treated like part of the family. James Keith alleges he was attacked at a site after being offered work while a homeless teenager in the 1990s. 4 men are on trial, facing 30 charges between them, including slavery and human trafficking. The lawyer defending James McPhee told the court he was outraged by the accusations made against him. Robert McPhee, his sons James and Stephen, and John Miller all deny the charges against them. More than 80% of Scots believe more should be done to reduce the amount of sugar, fat and salt in food to help tackle obesity. Well, a report on public attitudes to the problem has also suggested 90% of us think cheap fast food is too easily available. Suzanne Allen can tell us more.
Ladies, well done. A fantastic week with the weight losses.
A wet Wednesday in January, talking about dieting might not sound like much fun, but the women at the slimming class enjoy coming here. Do they think taking more sugar, salt and fat out of food would help people lose weight? Or is it up to the individual?
I would, yeah. I think they do need to have a reduction, but I don't think you can completely get rid of it because then you're taking away people's choices, aren't you?
I think the more that we educate, and from the younger the ages, the more they are able to make the right choices about food.
It shouldn't all be left to government, so on. It's up to the individual what you put in your mouth and how healthy you want to be.
The report asked people what should be done to tackle the obesity crisis. 82% backed measures to make the food they liked better for them, and 66% supported restricting unhealthy foods at supermarket checkouts. The report says people think cheap fast food is too easily available. So let's take this part of Glasgow as an example. There are several fast food chains near a high school. And in the 15 minutes we've been here, we've seen several children with burger and chips for lunch, all at pocket money friendly prices. 60% of us are overweight or obese, but the report's author says it's not all our fault.
We eat out a lot more, we've got a high density of fast food outlets, the unhealthy food is the cheaper food. It's now harder to find the healthy option if you're going out to getting a snack, to getting some lunch.
But there's confusion over what obesity looks like. Those surveyed were asked, at what point does this man look obese? But only 27% got it right. H. This is what we should be eating more of, a message that some health professionals think doesn't get through.
I think there's still a lot of misconception, not just in the general public, but also in the medical profession as well. There's been several surveys done of medical and clinical staff, and even they themselves couldn't actually tell you the components of a healthy diet. And that's partly because even the experts haven't fully agreed on what we should eat.
The UK government's so-called sugar tax is coming soon. Meanwhile, the Scottish Government is consulting on proposals to restrict the promotion of unhealthy food and drink. Suzanne Allen, reporting Scotland.
It's 18 minutes to 7. A reminder now of tonight's top story. The Justice Secretary confirms he challenged the police watchdog on its decision to allow the Chief Constable to resume his duties while he was under investigation, but he defends his action. And still to come, the refugees and asylum seekers helping to develop a strategy for how the country welcomes others. It's been billed as a multi-billion opportunity. Estimates suggest more than 100 oil and gas platforms will be completely or partially removed from the North Sea by 2025. But now a leading academic says he believes removal is unnecessary and that the platforms should be left where they are. Our environment correspondent Kevin Keane reports.
The Brent Delta makes its final journey to be scrapped in Teesside. This grand old lady was brought ashore in May after supplying us with oil for close to 40 years. The work to decommission her went on for half a decade, but was it really necessary?
The concentration of fish.
This academic thinks not.
We can make these assets clean. We can remove anything that we think might be harmful. And I've yet to get an environmentalist to tell me that clean metal in the sea is a particular problem.
Removing the infrastructure is an expensive business, not just for the oil companies, but for the taxpayer too. It's been estimated the cost to us will be around £24 billion. Launching his paper at Holyrood today, Tom Baxter argues that the platform legs are already attractive to marine life and that moving them will be a disturbance.
What about longer term? If you leave it there, is it likely to rust? Are we likely to leave problems for future generations?
It will certainly rust, and in time it will fall into the fall onto the seabed. But the bio-community on the seabed is very resilient. It will reef, or form a reef of the material that's there.
International agreements mean anything placed on the seabed has to be removed. Shell is applying for an exemption for these legs, but environmental groups say the principle should remain. And then there are the jobs. Shetland's hoping this, the Buchan Alpha, will be one of many to arrive here to be broken up.
This is one of the significant ports that can do some of the larger platforms that will come ashore, and we see that as a good future for continuing the oil and gas sector employment here in Shetland.
When Shell planned to dump the Brent spar at sea, there were huge objections and the plan was finally reversed. To avoid a repeat, Tom Baxter says money saved should instead be spent on green energy. The UK government says all decommissioning has to abide by international agreements. Kevin Keane reporting Scotland.
Grapes and cherry tomatoes may seem like harmless, healthy snacks for young children, but doctors are warning they're also a choking hazard. NHS Grampian has launched an awareness drive highlighting the dangers of some foods for children under 5. It comes after a number of choking cases in Aberdeen, 2 of them fatal. Rebecca Curran reports.
This is a daily task for Stuart Crichton, chopping food into tiny pieces to prevent his son Ryan from choking. The 3-year-old has a condition that means he's more at risk than others. His dad remembers the first time it happened.
Ryan was just basically eating a packet of Smarties and then became unresponsive, not speaking as he would, changing colour, and then at that point we knew that he was choking on the sweetie. It was very scary, especially being in public and then not knowing what to do either, being that it was the very first time of him choking.
We would recommend that grapes were cut lengthways and then quartered across the way in order to...
NHS Grampian has released a video warning of the choking hazard some small foods could pose to young children. The advice is to chop up foods like grapes and cherry tomatoes. It comes after a number of incidents involving youngsters in Aberdeen in recent years.
Been involved in 4 or 5 tragic cases of little ones who have been previously well, who have choked and then on foodstuffs and then have sadly died afterwards. So it didn't seem from my perception that people were aware that certain foodstuffs could be dangerous, and in particular we found that in our environment grapes were proving a particular problem.
In the depths. Oh, we need the steps, okay.
The message to parents is by making a tiny change like cutting up food, you could save your child's life. In 2016, 54 people in Scotland died from choking. Rebecca Curran reporting Scotland, Aberdeen.
Refugees and asylum seekers who've made Scotland their home are helping to develop a strategy for how the country welcomes others. It's hoped improving access to education, housing and health will make integration easier for future refugees. Laura Maxwell has more.
This is the reality of life in Syria.
It's from scenes like these that many flee. So now refugees from there and other countries who've settled in Scotland are helping to shape the welcome for those who follow. They include Feroz, who came here from Afghanistan. He has settled well, but life's not as easy for his parents.
It was very hard for me to leave everything and come to a country and start from zero. I'm young, right? I can manage everything, but because they're older, and some things about culture and as well, that's as well a challenge, and the language is the biggest challenge.
By the end of last year, more than 2,000 Syrian refugees had already made the long journey to Glasgow. The new integration strategy builds on the experiences of others like them who've already made Scotland their home.
It's not just the right thing to do, it's actually the smart thing to do, because refugees have skills, knowledge, experience, resilience, and they bring all of that experience and knowledge to Scotland.
These people will be our neighbours, they will be our colleagues, our friends and our customers, and if they have that access to their rights and if they can play an active role, we'll all do well.
From education and employment to health and housing, it's about helping people rebuild their lives from the day they arrive.
I feel Scotland as my second country now, and Scotland have lots of similarity to Afghanistan, especially if you go out the mountains and other stuff. The weather is a little bit strange, but the rest of everything is okay.
We can't do much about the weather, but it's hoped the new strategy will ensure a warm welcome. Laura Maxwell, reporting Scotland.
Aberdeenshire Council has renewed its objection to Aberdeen FC's proposals for a new stadium. The club put plans for the £50 million stadium and training facilities at Kingsford near West Hill on hold in October. A special meeting of Aberdeen City Council will rule on the plans later this month. The authority says it accepted work had been done to justify why Kingsford was the preferred site, but it was maintaining its objection. The club says Kingsford needs to be delivered as soon as possible. Now, the All-Scots wheelchair curling team has been announced for the Winter Paralympics in South Korea. And making his debut is Hugh Niblo from Stranraer, who says curling has changed his life. As a 24-year-old rugby player, he was diagnosed with MS. 6 years later, he started curling. Rona McLeod can tell us more.
This is the team which hopes to better the British bronze of the Sochi Paralympics in 2014. Hugh Niblo of Stranraer is the only debutant in the team, and he admits the Paralympic prospect has been life-changing.
I used to play rugby and things when I was younger, and I sort of gave up on the whole idea of sport. It's almost when you get the diagnosis that they took everything away, and dominoes was the only thing that I had for. It's as close to sport as I got.
In fact, after being diagnosed, Niblo admits he went through very difficult times.
Yeah, I've had low moments and disappointment, and I think I turned to pizza. I think pizza became my love, and just sitting in eating and didn't leave the house. And now I look back and see where I am, and I can't believe I was that person at one point.
And then can we just try one last big smile? Sorry. A big.
How much of a different place are you in right now compared to when you got your diagnosis?
Oh, it's night and day. And they got the diagnosis and things like that. It's very much just took each day as it come. I had no future plans. I barely looked a week ahead, but now I can see that, well, curling, I've been focused purely on Pyeongchang for 4 years. That's been my dream. But back when I got my diagnosis, I would never have been looking that far ahead and just struggled.
The next challenge, happily, is of a sporting nature and the Pyeongchang Winter Games. Niblo and Team GB determined to produce a podium performance. Rona McLeod, reporting Scotland at the National Curling Academy, Stirling.
Let's hope so. Now, let's get the weather from Christopher.
Jackie.
Described as strange earlier. Did you hear that? Strange weather.
Bit grim, actually, today, wasn't it, at times? Thank you, Jackie. Hello there. Yes, pretty cloudy for many of us, but not all. Lovely picture there from one of our weather watchers on the west coast. Tonight, cloudy and quite cold, but the cloud tending to thin and break overnight with a frost developing. The last of the rain pushing up towards the far northeast, lingering through Shetland. And a cold night, temperatures around about freezing, colder in the countryside and some mist and fog developing too. Tomorrow looks all right. Ridge of high pressure just sort of nosing its way in there, bringing a lot of dry, settled, crisp sunshine for many. But fog will be an issue, particularly through parts of the central lowlands, the far south, and some freezing fog patches in a few highland glens. But for many of us, come lunchtime, plenty of sunshine around and really quite a pleasant day with light winds. Maybe some cloud through the borders, East Lothian in towards North Lanarkshire, but many of us having a bright, sunny afternoon. Again, the Solway coast could well see some stubborn fog lingering, could be with you all day. Similar too for parts of Edinburgh and Glasgow. If you get the fog, cold, 2-3 Celsius. Elsewhere in the sunshine, 5 to 6 Celsius with light winds. That's going to feel OK. Further north, well, an improving day for Shetland after a cloudy, damp start, brightening up for you. Now, the rest of the afternoon into the evening, little change, again a cold, frosty night and some further mist and fog. And then, looking ahead towards Friday, well, a cloudier day compared with tomorrow, but there'll still be some sunshine around, particularly across parts of the North Highlands, in towards the Murray coast, and really to the north of high ground, with winds strengthening from the south. And then the weekend, quite an interesting setup, really. We have this large area of high pressure anchored over towards Russia, and weather fronts trying to come in off the Atlantic, but this high putting up a fight and squeezing the rain out of them. So keeping them towards the west coast and the rain fizzling and fading through the day. So for many of us, dry on Saturday. Sunday, another system, a bit more vigorous, trying to come in. Again, that high putting up a fight. So the isobars tightening. It will be windy on the west coast. That's the forecast for now.
Thank you, Christopher. And now a reminder of tonight's main news. At least 15 people have been killed by mudslides and flash floods in Southern California. Rescue workers are now mounting a desperate search for survivors, fearing that dozens of people may still be trapped. And that's Reporting Scotland. I'll be back with the headlines at 8 and our late bulletin at 10:30. Until then, from all the team, good evening.